Good afternoon, everybody, and happy Wednesday. Welcome to Within Summit. My name is Ashley Barkoviak, and I'm the Clinical Operations Coordinator here at Within Health. Today, I would like to introduce you to our presenter for today, Rebecca Brum. She is the Chief Clinical Officer of Within Health. As a graduate of Central Michigan University, she is passionate about the mind-body-soul connection. Her leadership style, as well as the clinical approach, reflect these values. Though she has helped clients through a variety of challenges in her practice as a therapist since 2005, she specializes in helping people work to improve their body image, heal their relationships with themselves, and overcome eating disorders. Welcome, Rebecca. We're so excited to have you. Before we kick things off today, I do have some general things to go over in regards to the CEU and the CME credits. For all of the CME credits, please email myself or Jamie Singletary. I will provide both of our emails in the chat just so you have access to that. So again, email us to get those CME credits. For the CEU credits, however, evaluations will be sent to your email that you used when you registered for this presentation. Once the evaluation is complete, you will receive a link to download your CE certificate. Please utilize your CE Go dashboards for all things CE related. A video of the presentation will also be available afterwards. We will not be providing the slides today. However, if you want to re-reference any of the information that Rebecca is sharing today, please rewatch that video that will be provided. You will not get credit though, however, if you just watch that video. You do have to attend live today to receive that credit. But again, anything CE related, make sure you utilize that CE Go dashboard. We also have a Q&A feature and a chat feature in the webinar today. Please utilize those for any questions that do arise. I will be monitoring that as well. And other than that, we are so excited, Rebecca, to have you here today, and we will kick things off.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ashley, so much. It's so exciting to be here at the Within Summit, and I absolutely love this topic. It's probably one of my very favorite topics to speak about, and I do have to give my colleague, Jamie Singletary, a shout out for this amazing title, Uncovering the Roots, Schema Therapy as a Pathway to Eating Disorder Healing. I could not have created that myself. That was her creativity and wisdom, but I feel like it completely captures what we're going to talk about today. Okay, so you already heard quite a bit about me, but what I want to highlight, I have the great privilege of being the Chief Clinical Officer at Within Health, and something that's really, really important to me in that position is this humanistic understanding viewpoint that we approach our clients with. And so you'll see a lot of that today. I hope that you get that flair from what I speak about today. And my experience is informed from my background as a therapist for a very long time. I always measure it in how old my oldest son is because he was in my belly when I was finishing up my graduate degree, and he is almost 19 now. So most of that has been in eating disorder work, and especially today is informed with my work in intuitive eating, internal family systems. I've had higher level training in that, and as well as schema therapy training. I don't say this anywhere else, but I do want to get it on your radar. I was introduced to schema therapy from a colleague way back early after I got into the field. And this book really changed my lens. It helped me develop as a clinician, and it's very user-friendly. So it's something not only that I felt like I helped me grow in my clinical career, but it's also something that I've been able to use with clients to help them understand. It's very reader friendly. You don't have to be a clinician to work, have it work for you and to understand it. So it's there. It's written by Jeffrey Young, the person who did create schema therapy. And it's available right in Amazon if it's something that you decide that you really like and want to know what I would recommend as the first step moving forward with utilizing schema therapy. So today we'll talk about defining what maladaptive schemas are, and we'll talk about how they impact regulation and coping. I really want you to be able to leave with schema therapy assessments. I feel like they offer like cheat codes. The first thing that I do, and I'm sure many of us do as clinicians, is really try to get a good handle on how the patient operates. And I feel like the schema therapy assessments provide that for me in a way that no other measure can do for my work. It helps to give an idea of how they emotionally regulate, how they cope, but also some of the traps that they fall into. And then the bulk of what I want to spend some time on, the third part of this will be giving clinicians that are here tools to create and facilitate corrective emotional experiences, so that you can have some things to help your patients grow and to increase their ability to cope. So on the agenda today, wouldn't be complete without a short review of the literature that's out there. I really want to highlight schema therapy's effectiveness with eating disorders, but also with BPD in particular, but also with personality disorders. I will give you a fundamental fund of knowledge so that you can operate and understand schema therapy. I'll talk about how to use those questionnaires, how to provide them, how to score them, and also how you might utilize them to gain more insight on your patients. We'll talk about what corrective emotional experiences are, and then I'll give you some techniques for facilitating those. And one thing that I am challenging myself to do more as an educator is to give kind of in the field kind of examples. So we'll talk about some case studies, and you guys are my guinea pigs for today in learning consolidations. So I've broken it up into a couple of sections, and what my goal is to be able to kind of say, okay, we talked about the thing. What did we talk about, and what are some key things to take away from this part? So we'll try that out today too. Before we jump into the literature, let's talk about some of the advantages. Why do I feel like schema therapy is such a strong tool for working with eating disorders? Um, First of all, the idea of understanding the why. In fact, I was just having a conversation with my husband about why I love eating disorder treatment. And I said to him, I have a patient that couldn't say that, but she manifested this eating disorder that could. And so I just think, despite its difficulty that it creates for the patient, there's also a unique functionality to it. And I feel like schema therapy really allows us to better understand what some of the roots and needs that eating disorders are providing for the patient in their life. I also love approaches and really believe that this is an approach that doesn't ask the question, what is wrong with you, but seeks to have this kind of trauma informed lens of what happened to you. And also to build on that, what happened to you, but also what are the unique traits in you? What are the unique experiences that you've had in your lifetime that maybe combine with those things to just situate you with the vantage point that you have right now. I also love that schema therapy works with comorbid conditions. In real time at the same time, because as much as the field has in earlier times believed that those two things could be separated, we really find that they're not. They're all kind of intermixed and mixed in with one another. And so trying to keep them separated when we are working with somebody just doesn't work as effectively as we can get. I really like schema therapy too as a trauma intervention. We'll talk about some of the literature behind that. And I also really appreciate the fact that symptom reduction happens as secondary to the healing and the ability to emotionally regulate that the clients get through these corrective emotional experiences. Okay, so a little bit of dive into the literature. Um, First bullet point really says there's evidence to support that maladaptive schemas are part of the pathology that's happening with an eating disorder. Also, that these maladaptive schemas or core beliefs are also understood as a risk factor for the development of and for the relapse of eating disorders. Significant reduction in eating disorder beliefs and distress following their schema therapy intervention. And also wanted to put this in imagery rescripting, which we'll talk about in the portion of tools and intervention, was found in a study to be as effective as EMDR in helping to resolve PTSD from childhood. So just so much rich ability to help clients and to help clients that may be in that more psychologically acute situation, maybe have some of these things that might indicate or might um, ping our risk for them to potentially respond poorly to treatment. So those things might be the presence of really entrenched beliefs, or another way to say that might be we see and we know what to do, but when that client is highly activated, they can't access that logical, loving parent within them to help them regulate. They're responding from this activated place. We also know that comorbidities and personality disorders can lead to a more difficult treatment response, as well as PTSD. And you can see here that the evidence does support that these are risk factors and suggests that schema therapy might be a valuable alternative to CBT. And I do want to build on that. Something I also love about schema therapy is that it's technically a cognitive behavioral intervention, but it was developed because of the witnessing, the acknowledgement that Jeffrey Young had that it wasn't enough for some patients that needed to really be able to get to the emotional, the humanistic parts that were really carrying a lot of pain. That CBT has a place, and I almost I will say often that I feel like CBT is like the alphabet, right? I wish that they would teach it in high school. It's a foundation that so much can be built upon. But this approach really allows for and blends in some of those beautiful experiential approaches like internal family systems and Gestalt and things like that, while having some of that strong backing of cognitive behavioral therapy. Okay, let's dive in. So here's your opportunity to kind of build a framework for understanding this intervention. Schema therapy says that there are 5 core needs that a human or child in the situation needs to have met in their childhood. So the belief is they need a secure attachment. They need to be seen. They need to be heard. They need to be felt, understood, validated. They need to trust that they are loved and wanted and meaningful to somebody. They also need to feel like they have autonomy, that they have a sense of self, that they have the opportunity to become a differentiated person um, through challenges and through mastery and through self-development. And they also need to be able to receive and even provide constructive feedback. They also need to have freedom to express their needs and to have them validated. So need to be able to indicate what they like, indicate and make decisions that reflect their values. They need to be able to learn to disagree with somebody skillfully. They also need to be able to embrace spontaneity and play. They need space and time to be funny, silly, non productive, self expressive. They need opportunity to explore and to seek adventure. I have 2 sons, and I had a mantra of like, I want them to be risk takers. I don't want them to be afraid to take risks and to get out in the world and try things. So when they would jump off of a slide and give me a heart attack, I would say, they're being risk takers and they're trying that on and becoming comfortable with that. And children also need realistic limits and self-control. So they need to be able to hear the word no, and to respect that. They need to be able to take responsibility for their actions. They need to learn how to respect somebody else's rights to safety, to privacy, to their own space. And they need to be able to learn how to have some of those boundaries for themselves and to practice self control. So, the fundamentals of schema therapy are that maladaptive schemas are the development and are developed due to these core needs not being met in childhood. So when those core needs are not met, then this collection of explaining the world to yourself as to why those needs weren't met develops. And it is believed that these maladaptive schemas are the root of dysfunctional beliefs, and beliefs lead to behaviors and actions, and ultimately coping strategies. And these schemas hold wounded parts. And early maladaptive schemas are they're the whole body experience. They're almost like the entire somatic experience. They're not just thoughts, right? They are thoughts, but they're also memories. They're also internal imagery. They're also emotions and bodily sensations. So they really can kind of take over for a person. When I'm explaining this to a patient, I might say, it would be like if you and I were just looking at the world together and all of a sudden you slipped on a pair of red sunglasses, everything in the room would seem red to you, but it wouldn't be. It would be the lens through which you're looking. And when we're activated, it's a schema that's activated, and we need to realize when we have that red pair of sunglasses on that's distorting our view of things. Um, because schemas are kind of the core function or a core fundamental. Let me talk a little bit more about them. So they're broad, they're pervasive, they are generalized, right? They're applied to many situations over the same context. So, or over different context. So I sometimes when I have rapport built with a patient, I'll say, this sounds like your schema because you have the same reason that you believe everything bad happens to you. It really has to do with somebody's relationship, not just with themselves, but with others, the amount of self-trust they have, the reasons why they may have maybe lacking self-trust or self-confidence, or the ability to see themselves through a positive lens. Schemas develop early in life. So, my saying with this is that there's just a time in our lives where the clay is more wet. And this is early in our lives where the clay is wet and it may leave a greater indentation when it's as wet as it is. Something that might happen to me now as in my 40s might leave much less of a dent or much less of an imprint in my life. Because a lot of me is now solidified and have had time to grow and challenge myself. But when we're early in our lives, the clay is very wet and very shaping. And so during that time, things start to kind of set and harden. And this is where we develop those schemas. I'll talk a little bit about this afterward, but I just think it's uh, when I work with younger clinicians, I will often ask them to really kind of think about how they're going to make sense for themselves over why bad things happen to really great people, because that's our role as clinicians, is really sitting with bad things that happen to wonderful people. So being able to do that in a sustained way for a long time without burning out or feeling hopeless, really, it's important for us to understand and to make peace with whatever it is for us, of why that might happen. So for me, I think it's ironic that the times in our lives where we're the least understanding about life, we're the least cognitively capable, and we have the least amount of resources, right? We don't have money, we don't have much of time that's our own, is the time that we're building the blueprint for this belief system about ourselves in the world. So these are patterns that can continue to play out through somebody's life, and through their name, early maladaptive schemas. They are dysfunctional and they cause impairment and they cause a lot of suffering, and a lot of stuckness. Okay, let's do our learning consolidation here quickly. Um, Early maladaptive schemas are the theme of how we explain ourselves, explain the world to ourselves, and they contribute to significant suffering. So they're kind of that collection of thoughts, beliefs, images, emotions, and bodily sensations. And the schemas that result because one or more of those 5 core emotional needs were not being met in childhood. So, Ashley, I do want to invite you. I saw a couple things come through the chat. I want to make sure we're not blowing past something that might be a fundamental need to know before we move and start to build on this.
Let me look. It looks like we just got one Q&A. So it's totally up to you if you want to answer it now or if you want to wait until the end. The question was, when you say develops in early life, what age are you speaking about?
Yes. So for schema therapy, it's 18 and younger.
Perfect. It looks like that is it for the chat and the Q&A.
Thank you. Okay. So with that in mind, here is a graph, and I'm going to highlight to you. So these are those core needs here. And then the schemas, there are 18 of them that fall under these 5 domains. And if somebody has an unmet need in the secure attachment area, they're going to have a schema that results in disconnection and rejection. If they have an unmet need of autonomy, it's going to result in one of those handful of schemas that fall under impaired autonomy. If they have an unmet need for freedom to express themselves and to feel validated, they're going to have a schema that has a hyper emphasis on others. If they don't have the need met to practice spontaneity and play, they're going to have a schema that reflects overvigilance and being inhibited. And if they don't have the opportunity to experience and have the needs met for realistic limits and self-control, they will have schemas that fall into the impaired limits domain. Okay, so let's build from here. So in the secure attachment, the disconnection and rejection domain is an abandonment schema. So the belief that somebody will always leave, that they can't trust somebody to remain in their life. The mistrust and abuse schema, the belief that others will intentionally cause them harm, that it's only a matter of time before they're hurt by people that love them. Also, the emotional deprivation schema. So this is the belief that the need for emotional support will never really be there. That I'll always have this deep void of emotional need that is never met. And that can look like a void of nurturance, a void of empathy, or a void of protection. There is also a defectiveness schema. So the belief, and often the belief that secure attachment was not experienced because that person is inherently flawed or worthless or bad. And then the last one is social isolation. So this can be this like, it's really just safer for me to be away from people. I'm different. I'm not a part. I don't have a sense of belonging. And sometimes I want it that way. That feels safer to me. The next domain is impaired autonomy and performance. So you'll recall the need that was unmet here was autonomy, differentiation. The schemas here are dependency or incompetency. So the belief that the individual is not capable of making decisions, that they must rely on others to manage them. If things are left up to them, they'll fall apart. Vulnerability to harm or to illness. So the belief that someone is constantly in danger. This can sometimes look like danger, or it can look like illness. And so the person is always just kind of waiting for something bad to happen, and is hypervigilant about something bad happening to them. Enmeshment, the strong attachment and need and over involvement that people might have with this schema. And then failure, failure schema. So the belief that one will never be able to be competent in areas that are important in life, like work and sports and things like that, school. So other directedness domain, this falls under an unmet need for the freedom to express oneself, to feel validated. So this is other directedness. So subjugation, actually, these are ones that we see a lot with patients with eating disorders. So subjugation is really, I'm going to give over control to other people, to make decisions about myself. Other people's needs or desires or beliefs about my life or how my life should be are more important than my ideas. Self-sacrifice, the belief that it is good, it is moral, it is virtuous almost to have their own needs not met, and that other people are more important than they are, and a willingness to sacrifice for other people at all costs, even to the detriment of somebody's happiness or well-being. And then approval seeking as well. The act of trying to excessively achieve approval and praise, trying to fit in, trying to get those things, while at the same time denying the person's own sense of self, their true feelings or identity. So when the need for spontaneity and play is not met, the domain of overvigilance and inhibition will have a resulting schema. What falls under that is a negative or pessimistic schema, where you have a heavy tendency to focus on the negative aspects of life, always kind of anticipating the worst, maybe ignoring the positives or minimizing the positives. Emotional inhibition. So kind of this constricted pattern of over control, or almost like a barrier or a pushing down of somebody's emotional experience. A fear of losing control, that maybe these big feelings are something to be avoided, something to be terrified of, and the belief that something terrible will happen if they do allow themselves to feel these emotions. Unrelenting standards is another one that I frequently see. It can manifest itself in a lot of different ways, but unrelenting standards schema is one that I see often with eating disorders. This is the belief that one must must meet these excessively high standards in other areas of life, or they will crumble from the criticism that another person has of them. That somebody being critical of them will destroy them. That they should be ashamed, and that they do deserve bad things if anybody thinks that they are worthy of criticism. Punitiveness, that can be self-directed or it can be other-directed. So the belief that if somebody does something that they shouldn't, or if they make a mistake, that they should be severely punished or harshly punished, and that again can be directed towards self or others. And you'll see the differentiation in the inventory that I'll provide. And then finally, the impaired limits domain. So you'll recall the unmet need here might be realistic limits set and enforced in childhood, and the art of being able to flow with those and manage the emotions that result. If somebody doesn't have the opportunity to master that in childhood, the result could be an entitlement schema. So the belief that one is superior to others, maybe more deserving or more deserving of special treatment. This is actually an interesting one that I see go hand in hand a lot with unrelenting standard schema. And often when it goes like that, it's because the individual believes if they hold this incredibly high standard of themselves, and meet it, then they'll be entitled to not have to feel some of these more difficult feelings like rejection or being told no. And then the last one is insufficient self-control. So this is this belief that somebody doesn't have what it takes to control difficult impulses or urges. They might be somebody that engages in risk-taking behaviors, or they might be really reactive and responsive to big feelings, have a low frustration tolerance, or have a hard time sustaining effort to something that feels really difficult to them. Okay, let's consolidate this down. So there are 18 early maladaptive schemas over 5 domains. Those 18 schemas are the various ways that somebody in childhood might cope with those needs, those unmet needs, and explain themselves to themselves why that need might not be met. Often it's an egocentric view, right? I'm the reason why those needs are not met, but that is through the lens of the child. And a super fun, interesting thing is everybody has schemas. There are not, healthy people that have no schemas. Um, Everybody has them. It's just the degree to which they are activated in your life, and how much you fall into the ones that you do. So I'll show you a little graph here in a minute, but to me, they kind of look like almost a genetic code, right? Like my genetic code might express in this way, and these are the things that when I am going to be activated are going to be the themes of that activation. Okay, so here's the inventory. This is the Young Schema Questionnaire Revised. There used to be a short form and a long form. This is a validated measure now that has combined the two. The long form was great, but it was a lot of questions and a hard sell to give to clients when you were asking them to do close to 300 questions. So this one is validated to be as effective, but about half of the amount of questions. There is a webinar there. If you are like, oh, tell me more, I need more than just a slide on this. And then what I would recommend if you are loving what you're hearing and you want to know more is, and I think that Ashley's dropping these in the links for you here. This last link, the Young Schema Questionnaire here, go and take it for yourself and you'll get a graph back that shows you your areas. So the link here will really take you through scoring it, getting the report back, understanding the report, understanding where you're scoring high at. And it's an incredible measure to be able to take with yourself. And in fact, I'm working on a presentation for the end of the month that is helping therapists understand their schemas, because we get triggered by situations. And when we know what our tendency is to view those situations as, we can become stronger and less activated. And then with the intention of thinking more clearly, being more intentional, not being swept away by some of our, kind of deepest, darkest vulnerabilities. What you would also want to know, something that I always tell patients is, I did this after many times of getting this feedback back. It is a lot of questions. And so I will tell them, you might start on the inventory and start to see, like, oh my gosh, everything that I'm answering is no, 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 no. Like, I don't even think Rebecca understands me. Why would she give me this? So I say, stick with it. You will come to sections where things are really resounding for you. So the inventory is really built by sections, and the sections correspond with the schemas. So if somebody just happens to line up with schemas that aren't resounding with them in the first few pages, they can kind of be discouraged. So I let them know ahead of time, like, stick with it. You'll find a spot, and that will help me to know you a little bit better. Um, what else? Oh, yes. Okay. It's important to know that it's not rational. So sometimes, especially with my really logical people or my people who have emotional inhibition, it's important to say, like, I need you to totally like throw logic and rationality out the window. I want you to think through when you're the most upset and things feel really bad, what you might tell yourself or how you might explain the situation to yourself. And then you can help them to know. This will really just help me get an idea of the way that you think when you're activated, and will give us kind of a shortcut or cheat codes to get to some of the things that will really help you to feel better. What some of the experiences that you had that contribute to some of the suffering that you might be experiencing now. Some important things about culture. Culture is absolutely going to influence, so it's important to kind of keep that tacked up on the board as you're conceptualizing your client. So also having a good understanding of the way that the culture that the individual grew up in, how the individual was shaped by their culture might also influence some of the schemas that are active for them. But also it can be different too. So the environment might lead you to believe that somebody has a schema, but actually it is um, something that is happening because it's just the environment. So for instance, I had a young man that I worked with that hit high for the enmeshment schema. And then when I said, tell me more about that, and kind of went through the inventory questions where he was scoring high, I understood him more, that he was really feeling like his boundaries were being encroached upon because his parents weren't able to respect his boundaries as a young adult still in the home. So it wasn't really that he was feeling enmeshed or that he had views of himself as being incompetent without being with his family. It was that he was feeling encroached upon. It's also in context of the larger picture important to understand how a healthy adult is considered, and what considerations go into being considered a healthy adult, and that this can look different across many different cultures. It's also important to consider the cultural experiences of racism, sexism, sizeism, and all of those other forms of bias that could be at play while your client was when the clay was wet. And Also, lastly, the idea of in what ways did this belief or this schema serve to protect that individual or even protect collections of people who might experience this unfair prejudice or bias. I'm going to drive through these somewhat quickly, but I will point out that the schemas that we see in patients with eating disorders often centralize around emotional deprivation, inhibition, mistrust and abuse, social isolation, defensiveness and shame, failure to achieve, dependence or enmeshment, vulnerability to harm, and subjugation. As you might expect, and just a guess, our patients are more likely to have schemas or have, I said that wrong, let me back up, are more likely to have high levels of schema belief and schema activation versus healthy controls. I'll show you a little bit more what I'm thinking of when we look at the case studies. And in patients, oh, sorry, with, and also abandonment and vulnerability to harm, again, pings there, and a little bit more of the research that I've looked at. Also abandonment, vulnerability to harm, again, and high levels of perfectionism in anorexia patients definitely had correlation with unrelenting standard schema as well. Okay. Ashley, anything that I need to back up to before we go into case studies?
No, nothing currently.
Beautiful. Okay, so let's do a case study review. This is a client, we will call her Brittany. She is a 47-year-old female diagnosed with anorexia nervosa restricting type when she was in residential approximately 4 or 5 years ago. She is an executive in the healthcare industry. She struggles with personal time. She often will fill her time with work and then kind of will have this tendency to feel really unfulfilled and disconnected from people in her life. But she can also recognize that she fills her time with long work hours and can recognize that for her performance equals worthiness, and that work is a really straight shot for her to get that sense of worthiness met. She also views herself as less than others, and we'll have to talk about imposter syndrome. And current eating disorder behaviors are subjective binges, guilty rumination around what she perceives as bad foods or foods that she should not be eating. So let me highlight here. This is the graph from her YSQ-R. And as you can see, this red line here, anything above the red line indicates that it's scoring highly, that it's a predominant way of viewing the world for your patient. So interestingly, these domains, in fact, self-sacrifice here, unrelenting standards, and approval seeking are all in that other directedness. So if I give you some background for this patient, it may not come as a surprise in understanding when the clay was wet for her, when she was in her young childhood, she often would serve as a kind of a referee for parents that had a lot of discord. So she was parentified quite a bit and had a difficult time really finding spontaneity in play, was really feeling, and this is where the unrelenting standards come in, really felt like the fighting stood out. It made her feel embarrassed. It made her feel like she was less than others. And so that she had to work very hard to be seen even as on equal footing, and that she always kind of carries around this belief that underneath it all, she really is just different and not worthy and not as good. When we went through the so another thing that you can do that's really insightful and helpful to understand what you need to work with your clients is when you go back and you see these schemas, what schemas are pinging high, you go back and you look at the questions. So when I look back, I want to see what did they endorse as a 5 or a 6 on a Likert scale. And so for this patient, she endorsed with self sacrifice. No matter how busy I am, I will always find a way to take care of others. And she also endorsed at a 6. No matter how much I give, I feel it's never enough. In the unrelenting standard schema, she endorsed, I have so much time, so much to accomplish that there is almost really no time to relax. Also, I often sacrifice pleasure and happiness to meet my own standards. And I strive to keep almost everything in perfect order. Then, additionally, it is important. Oh, sorry, this is for approval seeking. It's important for me to be liked by everybody I know. My self esteem is based mostly on how other people view me. And unless I get a lot of attention from others, I feel less important. So, knowing these gives me the ability to go back and say, okay, well, when you said yes to this, an emphatic yes, unless I get attention from others, I feel less important. Tell me about how that came to be. Tell me about what happens for you. Tell me about what that feels like in your body when you notice that. So it's just such a big opportunity to gain insight on our patients and to understand some of the mechanics happening behind the scenes for them. Okay, another case study here. We will call this patient Rachel. Rachel is a 30-year-old female diagnosed with bulimia nervosa. She also has a history of addiction, has been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, has a significant history, lifelong history of PTSD stemming from childhood. She also is an incredibly gifted and intelligent person. She's a graduate of medical student graduate, and grew up with inconsistent and chaotic relationships with caregivers. So, if I had you all in person, I would ask you to guess where you think this individual's unmet needs might have been. Since we don't have that luxury today, um, I will just say, right? More than likely this person is going to experience the unmet need of secure attachment. And you can see here, right here is this unsecure attachment. And she is definitely pinging, as I would say, in several of these. So she's pinging and feeling that her emotional needs will never be met, that the people who love her are going to abandon her, and that she's inherently flawed or defective, and that is the reason why she has not gotten the love that she deserves or needs. She's also pinging in these overvigilance schemas down here, unrelenting standards. Again, I said this comes up a lot, and it can manifest in different ways or manifest in ways. Part of her addiction was that she was so distraught of feeling like she never met her own standards that it was so painful that she felt she needed to numb that. And also holding this really negative and punitive view of herself. So I won't go through all of what she endorsed just in the effort to save time, but some of what she endorsed for emotional deprivation. I haven't gotten enough love and attention. For much of my life, I haven't felt I'm special to someone. So you can imagine being able to say, gosh, I see that you said a 6 to that question. Tell me about that. Tell me what that's like. Tell me what that feels like in your body. Tell me when that gets activated for you, um, what you want to do, what you feel like you need to do. Tell me who can activate that in your life. I also want to read her endorsements of unrelenting standards because they look different than the other patient. So she endorsed, I can't let myself off the hook easily or make excuses for myself. And also said, I often compare myself to others' accomplishments and feel that they are much more successful. So you can see that hers are a much more comparative nature, and they kind of go into the same funnel of um, negativity, self-punitiveness. Okay, so let's move into a space of what do we do with this knowledge, right? So the first part is this is a great tool to understand and jump into to knowing your patients. And what do we do when we know this information? So I love this quote by Walt Whitman, where he acknowledges that we all contain multitudes. We all contain times where if we look at it through one lens, we see it differently and we feel differently than if we look at it through another lens. So moving into the nitty gritty, I am drawn to interventions that acknowledge parts work. And I think that parts work is not as amplified or acknowledged as it should be. And that schema therapy really does utilize the idea of parts. And that an early maladaptive schema is a part. Um, what else do I want to touch on here? I do think it's also important to have the background that the intervention was developed because it was so bewildering for clinicians like Jeffrey Young to say, like, I have this rational, intelligent person in front of me who, in certain circumstances, is completely logical and wise and rational, and then if they're activated, it's like I'm talking to a different person. So it acknowledges that and it helps to integrate and bring coping under under this lens of self-leadership. Another big tenet of schema therapy is this ability to facilitate corrective emotional experiences. So in schema therapy, problems with emotional regulation are really seen as being consequences of these adverse childhood experiences, stemming back to those core needs being unmet. And that it's these kind of psychological traumas, big T's, little T's, that uphold the dysfunctional schemas. And that when we address those, when we resolve them, and when we heal them internally with the person, that emotional regulation and skillful emotional coping is the result. So we have the APA definition of a corrective emotional experience. Um, through the lens of somebody coming to understand an event or a relationship in a different way, or in an unexpected way that results in an emotional coming to terms with it, an emotional acceptance, an emotional healing. I do want to share one of these experiences of my own, and I'm very open about my experience with coming to my own recovery. And one of these experiences that I had in care as a teenager was understanding that an understanding with my mom. So when I was growing up, I have a sister that's 2 years younger than I am. every day before school in elementary school, my mom would put our hair in hot rollers. I'm an 80s baby, so hot rollers and big bangs and big fluffy hair. And sometimes it was French braided, and it always looked um, it always looked nice. And what I internalized that as is that myself in my normal state wasn't acceptable to my mom. I had to have a lot of effort put into me before I was presentable to her, to the world. But through this corrective emotional experience with her, I was able to hear her share with me that when she was growing up, when her clay was wet, that she grew up with as second to youngest out of a family of six, but the rest of them were boys. And so she said, as they were growing up, they didn't have a lot of money. And so they would just all kind of go out and play, and they would just play all day. And she said they would be dirty and kind of be just in the streets with dirty feet and dirty faces. And she said her best friend's mother came over once and grabbed her own daughter by the hand and said, "You may not play with these dirty little street urchins." And she said she felt so unloved. And she said she felt so inferior in that experience, and that it really stuck with her. And she shared that she never, ever wanted my sister or I to feel that we were unloved or seen as unloved. And so having that new lens to understand it and to feel that experience through changed it for me. It doesn't feel the same. And those are the kind of experiences that are corrective for our patients. So, the healing that takes place in schema therapy is the acknowledgement of what was not met at that time. So the therapist being able to see like the little person in that sometimes adult, sometimes teenager body of what needs were not met for this kiddo. And I really want to make sure that I'm not emphasizing any kind of parental blame. I think kiddos come into the world and they have their own personalities. They have their own way of perceiving things. Um, I found that perception on my own, and so this isn't a parental blame. It's kind of like the work that we're here to do. Um, and then our work as schema therapists are really to help support. But we want to identify, right? We want to become aware of what schemas are there. We want to help the person identify what it looks like and feels like when that schema is activated. We want to help them understand that belief about the world could have potentially been through the lens of their child version. So I sometimes will keep it light by telling this tiny toilets story. Many of us have had the experience of going back to our elementary schools and walking around and kind of being like, okay, there's no way these toilets were as little as they are now when I went to this school. And of course they were. But we were little. And so they just recorded as different. And we see them differently now that we are bigger. So there are a lot of experiences that record one way, that get put into the clay one way, but when we can see them through our adult lens, they change, they soften, there's greater understanding, there's greater ability to see the gray and what the circumstances might have been. So the goal with that is to reduce the activation, right? So reduce the time that the schema is activated, spend less time there, um, become activated less, and then have an increased ability and to move into a healthy adult mode of coping. So where I might say to a client, especially if I have rapport with them, I might say, things still feel like they're really foggy right now. Like it seems like you have a trust that um, things will feel more clear, but right now all you can see is the fog, and the fog is the activated schema. So we need to do some healthy coping so that the individual can just see things more clearly. Okay. So learning consolidation for that, parts are normal and natural. They are the way that brains function. They are the way that everything functions, in my opinion, right? This pen right here are a collection of parts to a whole. Uh, Corrective emotional experiences work to heal stuck parts that hold our trauma. And especially in terms of personality disorders, healing with the through the lens of schema therapy is not necessarily no activation, although you will see with time that these schemas will drop down on the graph quite a bit, and they'll cause less disruption for individuals. But it's less activation and greater time of being able to self-regulate and greater ability to self-soothe during times of activation. Okay, so let's move into a place of takeaway skills. Um, One of the first kind of jumping off points is this Rogerian kind of relationship that the therapist has the opportunity to offer some limited reparenting to the individual. So if the therapist can think about what is the patient's unmet needs, and then really, really work to attune with the individual. Something that I really like about schema therapy is also a slight bit more offering of yourself as a human, um, showing yourself as potentially being able to be fallible, to not be perfect, to kind of show more warmth, more humanity. And this graph here is one that's shared quite a bit in schema therapy. It has the um, continuum from nurturance and support to boundaries and confrontation. And it's showing care. It may be even being able to say, like, I really care about you. I care that you're experiencing suffering. I care that your heart is hurting, being able to provide guidance. Sometimes that even means just saying hard things, moving into empathetic confrontation. Something that I will often say is, from a really strong place of caring for you, I'd like to share something with you that might be difficult to hear. Um, and it's with that place of deep caring and for wanting the best for that patient. And then also being able to limit set. So having uh, a gentle place for that person to fall when somebody's natural consequence of the behaviors that they're doing need to take effect. So that might be a patient who continues to miss out on their sessions with you or doesn't show up to program. Um, Being able to set, maintain, and enforce the limit, but also in a way that assures them that your care for them is not in jeopardy. You're caring for them as a human. Some strong cognitive strategies. I like the cognitive strategies when the person is in a really regulated place. Although I'll say that I like that, especially with the schema flashcard here. If you look up schema flashcard, you'll find this script. Sometimes if I have a person who is, let's say, going home for Christmas, we might work through filling out this schema flashcard as what happens for you when you are at home and you start to feel triggered. What are some of the things that you can start to tell yourself? Let's talk through this and use this as a pre-coping plan. This one here is something that I really like to do when the person is activated. So I take a piece of paper, split it in half, and on one side I have them almost like brain dump. What are all the schema thoughts right now that you're having? So for this individual, they put, you just need to stay away from people so you don't have to keep going through this. And that's their first task. It's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, up to however many thoughts that they are having that are kind of swirling around in their brain. And then once they get that out, then I ask them to go through and to write the coordinating. So you can see 2 to 2, to write the coordinating response from their healthy self. So sometimes they can't access the healthy self. So I might say, I want you to write what you think I would say to you, or I want you to write what you would say to your daughter or son. I want you to write what you would tell your best friend or what your best friend would tell you. So, and I especially like this because it's asking them to write, um, and and it's not me saying these things, it's them needing to generate that. And so as they generate that for themselves, they grow in their ability to do that. Um, I also like them to, or challenge them to argue the opposite of a schema belief. Sometimes I'll say, like, I want you to be a lawyer for the opposition and find me evidence that the opposite of this belief is true. And I think the cognitive processing therapy challenge questions, if you Google that, the challenge questions are so helpful and applicable in a lot of settings, and I find them to be helpful when trying to challenge schema beliefs as well. Okay, let's talk about experiential approaches. I say therapists will often avoid due to a fear of destabilizing and a lack of confidence. I will raise my hand and tell you that those were my secret inner thoughts for a long time as a clinician, feeling like, oh gosh, things could feel like they could get real, really real, and maybe even kind of messy. Um, but with time and with comfort, I've really time and growth for myself. I've really found that those experiential situations where you can be in the moment with an individual when they're activated, when they're in their pain, have such a greater potential to offer and create change for the individual that now I just say, we have to get in there in those moments with people. So here are some of the ways that we can do that. And I know that we're virtual, but I still want us to try this. So I can't see you. You can see me. So I am going to invite you to participate if you would like to. But this is how I would often in a session have somebody move into a space to be more receptive to some of these experiential approaches. And this is just for me. This is how I facilitate a lot of success with this. And you might find your way is different, but I'll walk you through as though you were maybe somebody in this setting with me. So the first thing that I would ask you to do is to just close your eyes. It's a lot more easy to be kind of centered and in this space instead of outward in this space. And I often will say, I promise I won't look at you. I'm not staring at you while you do that. But I do just kind of want you to get centered in with yourself. I often do say too that not wanting to do this is really normal. And if they feel open to it, if they would trust me in this experience, and that they're always welcome to come back and join me whenever they want to, with their eyes open in the here and now. And then with their eyes closed, I will say, can you feel something around you? So I might have them feel the arm of the chair or a blanket or anything that's in their environment. And just tell them, tell me how that feels. What do you feel? What are you feeling? So they might say, I'm feeling the blanket. Tell me how it feels. It feels soft. It feels warm. It feels comforting. And then I'll say, okay, so I want you to remember that that is here with you here and now, that that's something that connects you to you being here with me in this space, and that you can always come back to this. part of this is going to be remembering that you're in your mind and you're experiencing that, but you're also here and that you're safe and that we're connected and we're experiencing this in the way that we are right now. And the first thing that I'll ask, and I'll ask you to just take a second here, and I'll take a second with you as well, is to just notice sensation. So maybe it's a feeling in your body. Maybe it's a thought. Maybe your mind is saying, this is dumb, I don't want to do this. Maybe, and often I'll have people say, I feel like there's a lot of heaviness in my throat, or I feel a pain in my side. And we'll just say, okay, just be present with that. Can you just stick with it? And often that is a way of being able to notice how somebody wants to avoid that internal experience, but also experience it, a facilitating experience with that internal world. So I'll invite you to come back to me now if you've had your eyes closed. But during some of these experiences where they might touch into parts that have been wounded, oftentimes the patient can have a lot of sadness, can express a lot of difficult emotions. So in the wrap up, I will say, how does that part want to be taken care of by you? How would that part know that it remains important to you, that you've seen it? And then how would that part like to be left? So oftentimes it will be the part wants a hug. That part wants to know that I will make sure that we have fun. And then I'll ask the healthy adult in the system to say, is there anything that when you look around and experience your inner world, anything that you'd like to do before you leave the system? Sometimes I've had patients that feel like they want to, send love out into the system. Sometimes they say no. And sometimes they can offer like a white light back to that. So it's really about them mastering their emotional domain. Okay, let's talk a little bit more. I would invite you to do this for yourself as well. We here have quite a few people that are in the path of the hurricane right now, and so been thinking a lot about them and hoping that they stay safe. So I'm going to invite you to do this experiential exercise with me. And what I'm going to envision, and I'll invite you to envision as well, is being in this big hurricane coming at you with the wind and the whipping rain, and feeling like maybe you're stuck in a scary experience with impending danger. And then I would like you to envision some sort of protection for yourself. So this could be a vault. This might be a container. Some people see this as being tucked inside an envelope, creating a safe place. But for you, how can you create, and what does it look like? What does your mind create as you are envisioning a safe place? And then if I had an individual in front of me, I might say, what's there? What color is it? What does it feel like when you're there? How do you know that you feel safe? And then I would remind them that that's a space that remains within them, that they can go to when they feel overwhelmed, when they feel distressed. Right, I'm going to invite you to come back. The next intervention I want to talk through is affect bridging. Um, so understanding what schemas are activated, right? And I will say, when you are having a big emotional reaction or the word is escaping me, but a disproportionate emotional reaction, my lens is that a schema is activated. So my question for the individual would be, what are the beliefs that you're telling yourself right now? So that might be the first thing, right? Just becoming aware of what some of the beliefs are that the individual is holding right now. A lot of times the individual can say, like, if you say, does every part of you, or is there a part of you that disagrees with some of those beliefs? And a lot of times they'll be able to say, yeah, I don't even really believe that. Um, and even sometimes when they can get there, it's important to help them to understand, um, is this the only time you've ever felt like that? 99% of the time they'll say no. And so then it's an opportunity to go in and say, um, well, tell me about other times you felt like that, or tell me about when a time that you felt like that the most is. Tell me how it felt when you experienced that. So a lot of times they'll go back to a time of childhood, of when they felt that way. And then you can ask them, um, what did you feel afraid of? And this is some IFS work, what did you feel like if this part didn't function for you, it would leave you vulnerable to? When you felt like that, what did you need? If your mom, dad, aunt, uncle, whomever could have done the thing that you needed so much, what would they have done? And then also, this Google image search is kind of an interesting homework assignment that you can provide when you start to get an idea of what the person's top early maladaptive schemas are. You can ask them to journal on, if they were to do a Google search on Rebecca Brum's experience with X schema, what memories would come up from that? And that can be an opportunity to invite them to go inside of their psyche and to experience that, alongside their healthy adult. Okay, so this is some of that imagery rescripting. This is where you would work with the individual to have these internal experiences that are supporting and assisting their healthy self and getting in touch with some of these parts that hold the maladaptive schema. What I like about what Schema Therapy offers um, is, I have found that many of our patients feel much more uncomfortable than let's say a general anxiety and depression patient might feel more uncomfortable inside themselves. So a little bit more resistant sometimes with our patients with eating disorders. So it's a natural part of schema therapy to envision the therapist being there with the individual if they just don't have reference to be able to act in their own best interest. So for example, I had a client who did a visualization, and she was with her, she's in her 40s now, but she, as a child, had a diet coach that was bought by her mother purchased by her mother. And she felt so shameful as the family was around and the diet coach was giving her all these kind of like, and so I was, asking her, what do you feel with you in this visualization with this part of you? What do you feel like you need to have said? And she really was struggling. She's being very nice. That is her self-sacrifice and subjugation schemas are. Well, I would want her to know that the diet coach is doing their best. And I said, okay, well, what happens if you put me in there with you? And this is a very well mild-mannered person, but she put me in there with her. And in her visualization, I started swearing at this diet coach and, saying like, you're hurting this child and how dare you and get the out of here. Um, Not exactly what I was thinking I would have done. But having me show up that way in her mind kind of served as this pendulum shift. And then she was able to visualize herself coming into the picture as more of an advocate for the child part of her in a much more kind of a fierce, but also protective and boundary setting way. I after the first time I gave this presentation or a version of this presentation, I had a therapist friend reach out and she said that she did some imagery rescripting with a patient of hers, and that the patient went home and drew this from the experience. So this is Ed, and this is the patient, and this is the patient's mom in heaven, and this is the patient's best friend, and this is the patient's therapist, and of course her two dogs with her. And she said when she now struggles with Ed showing up at the dinner table, she's able to visualize that and to feel the support of the people that are kind of collected around her in that corrective emotional experience. Some more concrete patients can have an easier time doing this through chair work. And we're all probably quite a bit familiar with chair work, but it really just creates kind of an externalized version of visualization. And some things that it also allows is to introduce and to invite healthy adult mode for the individual to get into a different part, to access a different part of them, and to also gain awareness of how those modes and parts present themselves. Okay, therapeutic writing. I think this is another really strong experiential thing that people can do. I have the link here, Ashley, if you wouldn't mind dropping that as well. Therapeutic apology is from Emotion Focused Family Therapy, another intervention that I really, really love. But the script for a therapeutic apology is so beautiful and so comprehensive. I've used it a lot in relationships, but I've also used it a lot being able to speak to a part from a part. So this could be therapeutic apology from the critical part to the child part, or a therapeutic apology from a part that felt really abandoned by the self. Um, so to the abandoned self from the adult self. Again, this is one of those things that is similar to the schema flashcard. It's got a great bones to it that will help guide a client through there. But again, I've just seen these be really transformative. And then to have the person read it aloud, it hits so many different parts of the brain and can facilitate really strong forgiveness. Okay, so our last learning consolidation. Clinicians can facilitate these corrective experiences with their clients. The goal of all of this is for the patient to become the healthy adult in their life. Sometimes we act as the healthy parent. Sometimes we model healthy adult behavior. But ultimately, our goal is to help them create their own internal therapist. The clinician models nurturing and parenting. I've already said that. The idea is that the healthy self heals and cares for the activated parts. And the client develops tools for self-care and regulation during these activated times and can take them moving forward into the places of their lives where they'll continue to feel activated by things, but will have a more comprehensive internal toolbox to be able to cope with those things. Here's my research if you want to know more or would want to dig into anything. Here is my email. Should you want to connect with me or ask questions, a lot of times I get, where can I go to learn more about this kind of stuff? Questions, you're welcome to email me. I think that the eating disorder community has such a lovely network of helping one another that I want to continue to contribute to that and know that I can get a lot from connection with all of you as well. Okay, I am going to go ahead and stop my share and answer any questions if there are any.
Yes, we actually had two came through. So thank you, Rebecca. The first question is, how popular is the fear of control schema among ED patients? I would think that the individuals with ED have a very high level of tolerance to unknown, so food is a means of control for them.
So how often is it that somebody's schema is losing control? Yes, is that it?
How popular? Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I do see that one a lot too. The fear of losing control. Um, the belief that if they're not in control, that they will be wounded in some way, that not holding control makes them vulnerable to being out of control and whatever that looks like. So yes, that is an important one. Although I will say, I felt like when I was putting the research up for schemas and the slides, I felt like our patients are representative of the human population too, because there's a real spattering of all sorts of different ways that an individual can view the world. And eating disorders fit into all of those in some way, no matter how you twist them.
Wonderful, thank you. And our final question for today is, are you familiar with Susan Simpson's approach to schema therapy? What do you think about her in comparison with Jay Young?
I've never heard of her. I would be very curious to look at her work. I really like Jeffrey Young. I really like Jay Early's work. There is a woman who does, I never remember her name, but she does the narcissistic view of schema therapy. If you look up, I think her name is Wendy Bahar Bearer. But I'm thrilled to be given another name. I will read it and let you know.
Awesome. Thank you, Rebecca. And I want to provide everybody as well. I put my email, CEGO's support number, and also Jamie's email for any other questions that may arise or anything in need of the CME or the CEUs that came up. I also want to really thank Rebecca for such an insightful presentation. I know I enjoyed it. I'm sure everyone did here as well. And I want to thank you all for sharing in this space this afternoon. We have so many great presentations on the docket for Summit. We have another one tomorrow morning, day 3, that starts at 10 a.m. MEST, and the session is Eating Disorders Through a BIPOC Lens, Challenges and Pathways to Recovery. So please make sure to check that out. We're super excited about the next couple of days in Summit. Make sure you go on our website and see what other talks are available. But again, thank you to Rebecca for sharing today, and thank you to all of you for joining with us. Have a wonderful rest of your afternoon, everyone.